morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Navigating the Apprenticeship Landscape, Strategies for School Career Leaders and Employers, and presented by Paul Ward, our Group Apprenticeship Recruitment and Business Manager. And I'm so sorry, I've got a sore throat, but I'm guessing so is everybody else. So we've got National Apprenticeship Week 2025 taking place next week. And we do hope that this is going to be really helpful for you and provide you with lots of information for an exciting week. Just very lastly, I sent out a newsletter which is entitled Our Top Tips for Finding an Apprenticeship. So I'd be really grateful if you could share that with your parents and students. Okay, so it's now time for me to hand over to Paul. Paul, thank you so much. And any questions you have, by the way, please, ask at the end. That'd be amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosie. Good morning, everyone. As Rosie said, I'm Paul Ward, Apprenticeship Recruitment Manager for Inspire Education Group. Very briefly, just by way of background, I've been working for IEG now since 2016. Obviously, we merged with Peterborough and Stanford College in 2020. Just for information, so you know the way that my team works, because this is very useful from the point of view of what we're going to be talking about with the webinar. I've actually got a team of apprenticeship recruitment officers. So outside of this, where you've got any queries or you've got any young people that you're working with, or if you're an employer that's here this morning and you've got any questions, then don't hesitate to contact us, because we can give you all the help and guidance that you need for that young person or for you as an employer. So there's quite a lot of slides to get through. I will try to get through them in about half an hour so that we can have some Q&A at the end. Okay. So obviously, apprenticeships, they are fantastic. I mean, I've been working with them now since 2009. Before that, my background was in the food industry, where I was involved with training. And then I got real exposure to apprenticeships when I started working in further education. So since 2009, a lot has changed in terms of the landscape. There's been, I'm sure all of you will be aware, we've seen in the press, we've seen good and bad with apprenticeships. There's been some horror stories over the years as well with apprenticeships, and the way some employers have perhaps taken advantage of perhaps the labour market and so on and so forth. But certainly since 2017, things have significantly changed. And again, some of you may be aware of some of those funding reforms that came into place in 2017. So with the apprenticeships certainly that we're working with now are very much about high quality. And they're very rigorous in terms of the delivery and the assessments. At the end of that process, that young person is absolutely qualified for that particular sector that they've been training in. So just briefly then, just starting off with the basics, and I'm sure hopefully you're fairly familiar with this anyway. We will go into some myth busting in a few slides time anyway, but obviously apprenticeships, combination of on the job training and formal education, leading to an industry recognized apprenticeship certificate. Now, I have carefully in that opening line there steered away from saying qualification. And if you're not aware, although we have 660 apprenticeship standards available in England, a vast majority of those apprenticeship standards do not have a mandatory qualification. So that might be your first takeaway from this. So that might come as a surprise to some of you. Historically, when we were on the old apprenticeship frameworks, every apprenticeship framework had a mandatory qualification. On the apprenticeship standards that we're working with now, they don't. And that, please, not for 1 second think, oh, that's sort of watered down quality. Actually, it's the opposite. Because the apprenticeship standards have been developed by employers, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, as they're completing that apprenticeship, it is like completing a qualification, but it's an industry recognized apprenticeship certificate that they get at the end. So what happens is, as they get towards the end of their program, they have what's referred to as an endpoint assessment, and the endpoint assessment, it does vary from one standard to another, but it can be made up of obviously formal examinations. It can be made up of practical assessments, professional discussions, project work, and a portfolio, evidence of portfolio. And they're very robust. For example, for hairdressing apprentices, in addition to testing, as in online tests, they will have a formal observation in the salon that will take 7 hours of them obviously demonstrating all the way from consultancy to doing all the various cuts and colours throughout that day. For a motor vehicle apprentice, again, the actual endpoint assessment will be done over a couple of days, 2-day period. Again, from them obviously replacing parts, servicing and maintenance. So it's very robust. Same with electrical, again, over 2-day period. Yeah, next slide, please. So the apprenticeship standards are made up of components, which again, if you've been working with apprenticeships, or you know about the old frameworks, very similar with the standards. And I've been talking about qualifications that may or may not be part of the standard. All of the standards have what we refer to as KSB, so that's knowledge, skills, and behaviours. So when you look at an apprenticeship standard, within that it'll have defined knowledge, skills, and behaviours that the apprentice has to achieve and demonstrate before they go through to their endpoint assessment. And we have a process so that as the apprentice progresses through their apprenticeship, there is a dialogue between the employer, the apprentice, and us as the training provider, that we are all in agreement that the apprentice is able to demonstrate and has the knowledge and the behaviours for that apprenticeship standards before we will move them into the endpoint assessment. And that's regardless of whether there's a qualification attached to that standard or not. So we know that they're ready for their endpoint assessment. Now, all the apprenticeship standards in England, just so there's no confusion around this part, can be viewed on a website called iFate. Now, on iFate, basically all of the standards that are currently live and available to be delivered are on there. As I say, the 660. And on the iFate website will also show you've got a number of fields on the left hand side, and you can also tick a field and it will show you standards that are being developed, and it will show you standards that are being that are due to expire. So obviously this is just a bit of a snapshot of the iFate website. As I'd put on the previous slide, this is due to be replaced by Skills for England, which you may have heard of. It's obviously been some of this in the news. If you, I mean, obviously I follow FE Week, sort of to keep updated. And so Skills for England is coming. It will replace iFate. Skills for England is going to be managed by the Education and Skills Funding Agency, where currently iFate isn't. But basically, obviously Skills for England will have its own branding, but I'm sure it will look very similar in shape to what we're looking at here. So when you go onto iFate, you can, as I say, on the left-hand side there, you can search. So if you're an employer and you may be looking for what apprentices are available to my sector, or if you're a careers advisor in a school and you're supporting a young person and they say, well, actually, I'd like to work in construction. So what construction apprenticeships could they potentially have a look at? If you just put in your keywords like I did at the top here for engineering, it will then obviously return and show you all of the apprenticeship standards that are available for engineering. So it will display that for you. Looking at the one at the top for engineering operative, if you obviously just click on engineering operative, it will take you deeper into the standard, and it will give you all of the details around the knowledge, skills, and behaviours. It will also have another document that will show you the assessment plan. So when I was talking about EPA, so between, for example, these three we can see on the screen here, each of them will have a different endpoint assessment. There might be some similarities, but if you look within each three, you'll have a clearly defined an endpoint assessment plan that will. So if you're sat with a young person, you'd be able to look at that, and they would be able to understand exactly what they'll need to do to achieve and qualify from their apprenticeship. Okay, some apprenticeship key features. So some of this is sort of leading into the myth busting stuff, just so it's clear. One thing that I've become aware of probably over the last couple of years with the emergence of T levels, maybe a little bit of confusion now around T levels and apprenticeships. Is T levels the same as an apprenticeship or the other way around? Just to clarify, T levels are not apprenticeships. So I can't stress that enough. It did only come up in a conversation again in the office yesterday. So apprenticeships are basically for that young person. If they've secured an apprenticeship, as far as I'm concerned, I feel like we've done our job. We've actually helped that young person um, in effect, leave the school system or college system from a full-time provision, and they've now progressed into work and they're on their sort of career path. So for me, that's great. That's where we've wanted to get. T levels does help with that journey, but a T level is still main college provision. It's still a full-time course with an extended period of work experience. So just to make that distinction between the two, because at the moment there is some sort of blurred lines that I'm getting in terms of when I'm having conversations with parents or perhaps some, clarifying that with people that are doing careers, leading on careers in schools and employers as well. So apprenticeships say that that part of it has not changed. Obviously, they're employees. So from an employer perspective, for us as a team, we provide our employers with an awful lot of advice around employing an apprentice. They have to be on their PAYE, for example. That's an absolutely, obviously the days of being paid perhaps cash in hand or whatever, all that is long, long gone. So it has to be on PAYE, and it also goes through a digital system that's called the apprenticeship service. So the employer has to have an apprenticeship service account, which links into our accounts at the college or the training provider, and those accounts then talk to each other around the funding aspects of the program. Um, Obviously, because they're then in their workplace, they're getting all of that practical experience. They're developing those hands-on skills with that employer. And as I've obviously mentioned before, they're getting that industry recognized credential. So it won't necessarily be a mandatory qualification. If it isn't, it's still the same in terms of the way that sector area will recognise that apprenticeship certificate in the same way someone would recognise, for example, a City and Guilds diploma. So as long as they've got that apprenticeship certificate, that standard is recognised by that sector area and those employees in that area. And of course, the other good thing about apprenticeships, there is really excellent career progression. So apprenticeships all start at level 2. So again, just to clarify that, there's no level 1, no level 1 apprenticeship. They all start at level 2 and they go all the way up to level 7, up to degree level. And there are progression routes for apprentices, which I think I have on the next slide. So what we have, so this is back on, you'll find this really handy to look at, particularly where you're sat and advising a young person, and also from an employer perspective too. We have on the IFATE website where we were looking at the apprenticeship standards on there. These are really useful that are called occupational maps. So what you can do is when you look at it, you will see a page again with all the sector areas. So as an employer, or if you sat with a young person, you can sit with them and go, okay, I want to work in the hairdressing sector. You click on the sector, and what it then does, it gives you a breakdown of the progression routes through for that, obviously from a job role perspective for the employer or for that young person. So looking at this one, for example, you can see we have hair specialist, which is on the left hand side, and there it's showing you the entry levels from a level 2, a level 3, and then you have the advanced hair specialist in the middle column. So now the apprentice can progress to level 4, and then you've got hair professional at the end, which is then a jump up to a level 6 apprenticeship. So it gives you that career pathway through. Got another example in the next slide, which I think was from the construction sector. So again, it's just another one I've selected. So again, really simple. Again, on the left-hand side there, the start of the process, it shows you the entry levels in terms of those level 2 and level 3 apprenticeships. So you could have someone that wants to be a bricklayer, and it literally is, the standard is called bricklayer or a carpentry and joiner. Shows you the entry point, shows you then the progression route into level 4 and level 5, and then if they're interested, maybe then, and we do get this, obviously interested in going into management, you've got that progression route all the way up to a level 6 apprenticeship. Okay, so benefits to students, of course. Now I think we're all very aware that for a long time that there's been a real focus on young people, school leavers, um, leaving sixth form, thinking of going to university, and perhaps there's been a tendency, maybe that's the route that's encouraged generally. I'm trying to be tactful the way I put this, looking at the, particularly perhaps with grammar schools, high schools, there tends to be that sort of, push maybe towards university and higher education. The the good thing, or the bit of good news now around apprenticeships and apprenticeship standards particularly, is there's been a lot of work developing apprenticeship standards at those higher levels. So certainly from level 4 all the way up to those degree level apprenticeships. So now, for that young person that is thinking of, actually I want to look at, university, that higher level, it is absolutely worth them looking at what the options are for a higher or degree level apprenticeship. Obviously, the good thing for them is if they get that relevant employment, that employer basically will fund that apprenticeship for them. So that's obviously a huge advantage for them. They're not going to accumulate that student debt, and they're getting paid as well while they're doing that. Now, there is, if you're in that situation with a young person, or it's something you want to highlight, on just simply, if you go to gov.uk, I haven't got a slide for this, so it's worth noting. If you go to gov.uk and just type in higher apprenticeships, there's a wealth of information in there around higher apprenticeships, how they work, and also periodically they will post a vacancy Excel spreadsheet on there, and it will give the young person and yourselves the current vacancies for higher and degree level apprenticeships across England. So it's really useful. And you won't be surprised to see in there, you will have a lot of the major companies. You'll see Rolls-Royce for advertising for apprentices. Typically, you'll see the various police forces advertising, NHS. But it's certainly a good one to direct a young person to if they're looking at a higher apprenticeship or a degree level apprenticeship as an option, as an option instead of going to university. Of course, the other key thing with apprenticeships, it is giving them that enhanced employability, because if you compare a full-time student, say, coming into college to do a vocational course compared to the one that's gone down the apprenticeship route, the difference between obviously that apprentice and the full-time person, as you can imagine, is there's quite a noticeable difference in terms of perhaps maybe a certain level of maturity, certainly from the point of view of skills, because obviously the apprentice has got the advantage, they're actually in the workplace every day. The student that's coming on a mainstream full-time course is disadvantaged in that they're obviously not getting that daily experience in the workplace. So apprentices obviously have an advantage. Um, Again, with apprenticeships, and we do see this, it's not just something that we obviously have written down. They do have improved career prospects. So typically, again, with apprentices, when they're working for an employer, particularly where it's larger employers, they've invested a lot of time into that apprentice. They don't want to lose them, so more doors open and more opportunities. And that tends to be quite a common theme with the larger employers. Where it's a smaller employer or a micro employer, typically what you see happen is as that apprentice matures and they qualify, quite typically, if they're working in one of the more vocational areas, and taking electrical as an example, it's not so uncommon for apprentices then to leave to perhaps work for maybe a larger company, or maybe to look at setting up their own business. So that's quite common, which is great that it's equipped them to do that. And then finally, just to mention about personal development. So again, it's those other skills that we're all very familiar with, that we know that with young people, it's developing those other skills, those softer skills. So just the basic things, good communication, working with that broader team, able to think, use their initiative, problem solving. So again, an apprenticeship is really good for helping that young person to develop those skills. And interestingly, it's one recently where we've been engaging with employers. It's something that's actually come back from employers, that they really do value this, that as part of the apprenticeship program, the more that we can do as a provider and working with them to develop those sorts of skills for that young person is obviously really useful. And we all know from our own experiences of work, as we go through our working lives and our careers, that actually, the benefits to us taking those skills that we learn into our broader lives as well. So really crucial. from the point of view of the apprenticeship program and helping those apprentices to develop. So some key facts, just really quickly, I'll just sort of whistle through these. So again, it's just some areas where there can still be some confusion. So I'm just going to start in the top left-hand corner there. So obviously, as I've said, apprentices are paid. They are paid employees. We're always very clear with employers, they must be on a written contract of employment. So in effect, you're treating them like any other employee, but they're just on a training program, need to be working for at least 30 hours. There are other things around that in terms of the 16 to 18. They should only be working a maximum of 40 hours a week. There's restrictions on if it's a 16, 17-year-old on working nights and things like that. But if you need any more information around that, please do let us know and we can share that with you. For apprentices, training is typically 4 days in the workplace and 1 day at college. We do have what we refer to as hybrid or flexible delivery models. So depending on what the apprenticeship is, that can vary. Some programs we only need them to come into college 1 day a month, for example. So there is some variation there, and we do try and bespoke it for employers where we can as well, to be flexible as we can within the resources that we have. Again, as already mentioned a couple of times, apprentices gain recognised qualifications or sector accreditation. So just remember that. I say that was one of your key takeaways, not necessarily a qualification, but it is a sector accredited apprenticeship certificate they do get at the end. A majority of apprenticeships lead to permanent employment. And again, from the work that we do in terms of destination data, you'll obviously, those of you working in schools will be familiar with that, of course. We do the same for our apprentices. We sort of give them a call, how you doing, what's happening. So majority of them, certainly well over 90%, remaining permanent employment. Many stay with the same employer, or they will progress within their chosen career into another role that isn't an apprenticeship, or possibly sort of a higher level apprenticeship. So with the age with apprentices, this comes up quite a lot. And I still have people go, oh, I'm 23, 24, am I too old? No. So there's still a bit of a view, I think, or a misconception, I should say, that apprentices have to be between the age of 16 and 18. They don't, of course, they can be any age. And again, if you look at the national stats for England, you will find that majority of apprentices are actually over the age of 19, which you could have a view on. I think, well, obviously we need to be pushing them more for 16 to 18-year-olds, and we probably do. But you will find that there's a lot more now starts in terms of those that are actually 19 or over. And some of that is due to, as we're very well aware of, where people having use apprenticeships as a way to retrain, perhaps start a career in a different sector. There's been some good examples of that on the news as well, where they will do a feature and it'll be around someone who's probably 40s, 50s. I understand recently one of the colleagues was telling me they did a piece on the news the other day. I think it was a National Apprenticeship Week next week, and it was this lady who was in the 60s and she'd done a career change, and it was actually through doing an apprenticeship. So open to anyone of any age. They last anywhere between 1 and 4 years. I know that's a huge difference, and that's simply because of, depending on obviously the level and type of the technical aspects of the apprenticeship. So that's why you've got the difference, such disparity in the duration. So obviously, typically engineering, electrical, plumbing and heating engineers, they're over a 4-year period, where some of the, say, for example, customer service would be over 2 years. So obviously, as we're all aware, apprentices have to be paid. So currently, it's £5.28 an hour. From the 1st of April, that will increase to £6.40 an hour. It's interesting because when I talk to young people about wages at open evenings and other events, I get two reactions. It's quite strange, really, with the wage. When I say the current minimum wage is £5.28, I'll either get a young person that looks jubilant at the thought of earning that, or I get the opposite where they go, "Is that all?" So it's a real mixed response that I get. It's always quite an interesting one. Now, just to emphasise, that is the national minimum wage rate. So, and again, what you will see is that there is a variation in that. So, again, won't surprise you that are on the webinar. It will depend on that particular employer. So, if the apprentice has got an employment with a micro or small employer, typically they're going to pay the minimum. But if they're working for a much larger company, I won't drop any names that we're probably aware of in the area. They will, you look at what they're actually paying from outset, and it's a really good salary. So there's quite a difference. Some apprentices then scream that's unfair, and I go, well, yeah, it does seem unfair, but unfortunately, that's the way they have to put a minimum level in there. And then it is down to employers to obviously then just obviously decide on what rate they pay. One thing we do say, we do emphasize to employers where they do pay the minimum, is that look at rewarding performance and development. So we do encourage them to say, well, you know what, when you do a performance review, progress review, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months in, you could reward that with a pay rise. And most employers take that on board and will then look to put something in place to increase their pay. And then, as already mentioned, the 660 approved apprenticeship standards, that figure will go up and down depending on new apprenticeships coming in and which apprenticeships have expired. There's a lot of movement. We have no control over that, by the way, as training providers, because those apprenticeship standards are owned by employers, not us. They're all developed by employers. So if an employer says there's no need for this anymore, you will find that it's been removed. And typically what happens is that because they're being revised all of the time, the employer group that originally made that standard might go, industry's changed, we need to revise the standard, so this one will expire and it'll be replaced by a new one. And that's been typically happening for a lot of the engineering standards at the moment. Okay, just very briefly. Oh, okay, slides were going mad. That wasn't me. Wasn't me. So benefits for employees, just briefly. I think I've probably covered most of this, but of course they are. I can't. I would never sell this enough to employers, really. And obviously, I engage with employees an awful lot. And for 80 to 90% of employers, having apprentices is a great experience. It brings in obviously new talent into the business, and as we all know, when you bring in particularly young people, they are so obviously up to date with technology. And for a lot of us that may be a little bit older in the workforce, particularly in some businesses, that's probably a bit of a struggle. And they bring in this fresh talent who are really clued up on technology, understand social media, understand how all these things, including now with AI, they're kind of your innovators now. So these youngsters are coming in, yet they're your natural innovators. They find that quite easy. So actually, the benefits to a business, even if it's a small employer, it can be amazing. And so we get a lot of feedback from that from employers. And the area that employers always say, could we support more on, is their softer skills. So they have the innovation there through the fact that they're technologically plugged in, and they can really help and assist an employer there. It's just helping that apprentice with their personal growth, basically. So innovation and growth is a key thing, definitely. The other benefits for employers, of course, is that you tend to get loyalty from apprentices. So if that employer looks after that apprentice, it can become a long-term investment. They want to keep hold of that apprentice and invest in them. And typically we will hear employers say to us, we want this apprentice to be the next supervisor, the next manager. And for smaller employers, you'll get them to say, I want them to take on the business. I'm getting old, whatever. And they're really encouraging that apprentice to get involved with the management side of the business, which is great and really exciting to hear. And yeah, it's around recruiting and training the next generation of employees. Just to share with you on briefly, just aware of time, on Friday, we've just set up an ambassador network for our apprentices. So basically, working with employers, we identified a number of apprentices that would be interested in setting up an apprenticeship ambassador group. And we had our first meeting on Friday, and this is bread and butter to me. I'm doing this every day. I was in that meeting with these apprentices, and that meeting was so inspirational. If you'd been in it, honestly, and listening to their stories and their journeys, where they'd come from, and many of them had been in very, very difficult situations. They'd gained an apprenticeship. It really sort of put them on that path, and they were then talking through not only the benefit that had been to them from being an employee on an apprenticeship program, but how that had then sort of spilled over into their everyday lives of what they were learning. And it was just fantastic. I thanked them at the end to say, you know what, this has been the most amazing meeting, and I feel really inspired now to carry on doing my day job and working as hard as I am to sort of get these opportunities through for them. So I feel very passionate about it. So it's really good, really great. So if there are any employers here with us today, I absolutely encourage you to, if you've not had apprentices before, to absolutely look at it and speak to us further on that one, definitely. Okay, so just aware of time. So addressing misconceptions. So I say we still some have these common myths that come up about apprenticeships. Key one that still comes up is that there tends to be very much a view that apprenticeships are for people that are not very academic. Um, and that has definitely been a real shift away from that. So, as I've mentioned now with the apprenticeship standards, in terms of kind of particularly around the maths and English, the standard we're looking for is for those of you that work in schools. When I say level two, we're really looking for that sort of level two ability. So you're talking sort of GCSE grade 4, and for many of the standards now, certainly from a level 3, we're saying to our applicants, your English and maths needs to be around a GCSE grade 4. Now, you may have a view that that seems perhaps quite rigid also, but from experience, what we've found is that if that young person starts on level 3 electrical, level 3 engineering, and they've got GCSE grade or 3 or below, that they struggle. So, a couple of months in, they're starting to fall behind with their peers. So what we've done is now we've gone and put in some more initial testing that we can put in place and support that we can put in place for them to get them to that level of maths and English that they need to be at. Um, so yeah, apprenticeships require lower academic ability. Again, many apprenticeships require strong academic qualifications and ongoing learning, particularly as I've mentioned before about those higher levels. Um, and then apprenticeships can lead to diverse career paths and higher education opportunities. Again, just to re-emphasize that if you're working with any students and they mention about university and apprenticeships options, gov.uk is definitely a place to go to. Say, just put in their higher apprenticeships, loads of information, and it will give you all of those jobs that are available for them to apply for in England. So in terms of the application process, so there's some great tools out there. The main one that I'm sure some of you will be familiar with is obviously finding an apprenticeship. There's also another really good one called Not Going to Uni and other job sites. Your young person wants to obviously write a good quality CV, or compelling, as we call it here in the slide, highlighting relevant skills and experience. That can be a challenge for young people. So I always say to them, it could be hobbies, interests, something they're engaged in at school. Very often they'll go, "Oh yeah, I like sort of doing something at the weekend. Yeah, my dad's into motorbikes, and I'm helping him take the bike." Anything like that, they need to get that on application, just so that it highlights it to the employer around their skills and interests and any experience they've got. Preparing for interviews is another good one. So again, this is obviously where you can play a crucial role in preparing that young person for interview. Never take anything for granted, down to even what they're going to wear, how they're going to present themselves, what they're going to say. I think the more that we can put into that is really quite helpful for that young person. Assessment centres is something that we're currently doing. So basically, to our Peterborough and Stanford campus, we're now running assessment centres every week. So we have an assessment centre on a Tuesday, to get it right way round, at Peterborough, and we have one at Stanford on a Friday. We're running these all year and through the holidays as well. So obviously for anyone that's in year 11 then can come along. We're invited. So if anyone's interested in an apprenticeship, or you've got any young people that are interested in apprenticeships, they can come to one of our assessment centres. They'll meet one of my team, and we will do some, it's nothing scary. We're very friendly. They'll get some English and maths testing to see how they're doing with that. They'll have a very informal interview with us, and we'll just talk to them about what their aspirations are. And then the key takeaway for them is we will equip them with what they need to do next in terms of the process and the application process. If you want to know any more about that, please just contact me, and I'll send you some more information. So again, I think you'll be familiar with obviously Find an Apprenticeship. So just Google Find an Apprenticeship. Obviously the website lives on the gov.uk website. Very simple functionality. Your young person will need to register to apply, but anyone can go on there and just search for vacancies. But so you do need to register to apply. It's a very simple, basic application. The applications work in two ways. So when we work with an employer, employers can now post a vacancy and have applications go directly to their website, or they can ask us to do the vacancy and we can link it to their website, or as another option, we can do both for them. Majority of our employers prefer us to advertise and manage their applications. So, which is quite good because it means we get first sight of the application. We can review that for the employer. And what we can also do is we can support those applicants through our apprenticeship centres by bringing them in and speaking to them. So if they're not successful with that particular vacancy, we can then signpost them to other vacancies. I also just put in about not going to uni in case you're not aware of it. I think this website as such has been around probably for several years now, but it's not so familiar. But it's worth, again, if you sat with that young person, directing them to this. Now, we probably, you may know that Find an Apprenticeship should have all apprenticeship vacancies on there. And once it was almost like mandated that employers should do that, but of course employers can do what they want. So you will see different vacancies on not going to uni. So if you, again, if you have that young person that's particularly interested in looking at options, as in going into the armed forces, the police, what the options, looking at a comparable to doing university, to absolutely get them to have a look at this, not going to uni, really useful. But certainly where you have those that are thinking of a career in the military, police, definitely have a look at this website. This is a relatively new one. So I actually stumbled across this one by chance a couple of years back. So UCAS now are running their own apprenticeship webpage, and it's actually, yeah, very useful. So again, in addition to the previous two, worthwhile having a look on here. Again, you're just equipping your young person just with another really good service to have a look at in terms of apprenticeship vacancies, just to see if any filter through to here and they're not on the other two. And then, so clear in terms of that sort of advice and guidance to that young person, what we always say, and again, we have a bit of a patter that we go through at open evenings when we meet with, say, someone from year 11, 12, so on, and parents, and they want an apprenticeship, they haven't got an employer. We always make it very clear that they need a backup plan. So always have a B plan. I always say, always have a B plan, and that you can see them, thinking this through, and the parents do the same. So because your apprenticeship is obviously relies on employment, and I'll have young people that say, I've got an employer, and I'll go, well, that's great. But from my experience, I know that employers can still let you down. And it's not uncommon that I'll have an open evening, a young person say, I've got an employer, that's great. And I've had this conversation with them during one of the open evenings over the sort of autumn winter period. And they'll contact me in a panic in the summer and say, oh, my employers let me down. They've not, I've not got the employment anymore. What am I going to do? So this is why I always emphasize have a backup course. So if I have someone that says, yeah, I've got an employer, it's for a carpentry apprenticeship, I go, well, apply for the full-time carpentry apprenticeship just so you've got a backup. um, you know if I have someone who says, I've got a business admin apprenticeship, great, I've got an employer, apply for the full-time business course, just again so you've got a backup. And equally, it applies the same to someone that you'll get some young people go, oh no, I definitely only want to an apprenticeship. I'm fed up with school. Can't bear it anymore. I don't, and actually go, well, yeah, come to college. The experience will hopefully be different for you. But while you're looking for an apprenticeship, absolutely apply for a full-time course. And then if you get your apprenticeship, great. If you don't, then you can come on the full-time course. And then the positive then is that actually, if you're on a full-time course, we can transfer you from the full-time course onto an apprenticeship. And actually, we have a really good conversion rate of our apprentices from full-time, sorry, our students from full-time going on to apprenticeship. So it's another good thing to just say to that young person, actually, if you start on a full-time course, it's not the end of the world by any means. Actually, you're here, we can help you, we can support you. We have an apprenticeship team and a centre. We can help you, equip you to get that employer. So that side of things works really, really well. Okay, this is the last slide. So in terms of resources and information, I just wanted to highlight, obviously I'd mentioned gov.uk a couple of times. Again, you won't be surprised, I'm sure, that if you go onto gov.uk, just type in apprenticeships, you have a whole raft of information on there. And actually, from an employer perspective, a careers advisor perspective, or me as a training provider, if I want answers to apprenticeships, I just need to go on gov.uk. It is actually all there. It gives you all the information you need to know about how they work, how the apprentice is employed, what an employer has to do, and of course, you've got your apprenticeship vacancies. So it's your go-to place. The other one I just wanted to highlight, and this is it is linked to the government website. It's managed by the government, is Amazing Apprenticeships. So Amazing Apprenticeships is an area that you as careers advisors can go to if you're not familiar with it. And there's a lot of resources and things on there that you can use from a school perspective. And also, obviously, we do at colleges. So for National Apprenticeship Week, if you go on there at the moment, you'll see a load of stuff on there for National Apprenticeship Week. Resources on there are really good. It'll equip you with resources you need for talking to employers, talking to a young person, talking to parents, etc. Really good. And there's some really quite good interactive things on there to highlight. So you've got something, for example, like Apprenticeship Arcade. So you could even get your tutors, teachers to run a session in a class. And under Apprenticeship Arcade, if they want to do something about apprenticeships to encourage young people to understand what they are, they've got a whole series of games that you can play on there. So you can play games, and it will teach them then how an apprenticeship works by playing the games. And they're quite good. And I have to say, I have had to go on a few, and you get into it, and they become quite competitive. And yes, I did become in the end, because you have to put a name in. So I didn't put Paul Ward. I became the apprenticeship king. They are quite good. So they're quite good fun. But yeah, they are good. So certainly encourage you all to have a look at that. And I think that was the last slide. So here we are, contact information for both Peterborough and Stanford. Do rest assured that if you do use the contact emails in there, and you put apprenticeships in there, they will come through to my team, and we'll get straight back to you. That's it. Thank you.
That's super helpful. That is really, really helpful. I'm just trying to see if we've got any questions. I can't see any at the moment. You see any, JJ? No. Okay. Don't think there are any. I thought that was incredibly helpful, especially information about the assessment centre as well. That's great. Really, really good. I've just got one more question, actually. If I know you said you can become an apprentice at any age, if you want to become an apprentice after 19 years old or at 19 years old, does that mean they have to pay for their education part?
That's a really good question. Yeah, that's a really good question. So for employers at the moment, for 16 to 21, it's fully funded by government. So if an employer takes an apprentice on and they're over the age of 21, the employer has to pay what's referred to as a 5% co-investment.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Now, obviously, it's a whole nother webinar going into the way the funding works. But with a levy-paying employer, they pay for their training out of their digital account. But that's not for us to go into that.
No.
It gets a bit complicated. But yeah, fully funded, 16 to 21.
Okay, so I've got so Helen's asking, this is Helen Elliott from Bourne. Good morning, Helen. And she says, I was looking with year 11 the other day, and we were trying to get an idea of the number of electricians apprenticeships. There were barely any advertised, even nationally. Is this because employers come straight to college, of course, and recruit direct?
An absolutely great question to ask. I didn't cover it in the slides, so I'm glad you've asked that. So typically you will see that on all of the web page that we obviously had a look at, typically you will see your larger employers advertise on there. So when you're talking, you're quite right with electrical contractors, you're right. They go to training providers, colleges very often directly, and will go from your current students. Have you got any young people that you would recommend for apprenticeship? So yeah, typically that does happen a lot. So we always say for young people, it's worthwhile them, in addition to looking at our websites, contacting local electrical contractors where they live, basically.
Yeah, I was talking to a parent the other day, and I said to him, you know what, actually, it's really worth
you and your child just getting in the car and driving around
Yeah.
locally, making a
Yeah.
note of the local businesses and contacting them
Totally.
directly. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And just to add into that, and Rosie, thank you for mentioning about our assessment centres again. Extending our service now, because we've kind of recognized how difficult that is. So by having the assessment centre, we can now bring those young people in. And with year 11s, as I say, we're going to run it through the holidays so they can come in to see us. If they're looking for electricians, then because we've got the contacts, we can do the assessment centre. We're equipping them with what they need to do, but we can then help support with them finding an employer.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely key. So I'll be very keen to promote the assessment centres throughout the schools now, because I think
Yep.
what you've got there is absolutely exactly what people are
Yep.
looking for, and also because you've got the contacts as well. So brilliant.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, I can't see any more questions, but that was extremely helpful. Thank you so much. And just lastly, I wanted to say, if anyone has any sort of specific webinars they would like us to run in the future, please don't hesitate to contact me and we will do our very best. Okay, thank you so much, Paul. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
And I'm getting lots of messages saying, yeah, thank you. This has been really useful. So
Good.
amazing. Okay, have a great week. Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. Bye. Bye.